I wish I could do that. Just give it like 5 seconds of clean audio, and then I'll introduce us.
Okay.
Hello, and welcome to episode 10 of the Peterpodcast. I'm your host, reporter Taylor Clydesdale. With me is my editor, Lois Tuffin.
Hello, let's do this.
And our guest this week is Christian Harvey from the Warming Room.
Thank you for having me. It's great to hang out with you both.
Yeah, why don't you describe yourself and the Warming Room for us?
Sure. So my name's Christian. I'm the director of Warming Room Community Ministries, which is a program that has the Warming Room, One Roof Community Center, and our home program. I'm also a deacon at St. John's Anglican Church, which is a type of minister. And I've worked there for over 15 years. So
yeah, you were young when you started there, young.
Like 21, 22, something like that. Yeah, so I've been there. Yeah, it's been over 15 years now, which is pretty wild. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so I was going to say we're in the warmer part of the year, but then we, about an hour ago, had a small blizzard.
Yeah.
So, but we're transitioning into the warmer part of the year, so maybe we can talk about what that transition means for the services that you guys are offering.
Yeah. So, an interesting thing is that Warming Room up until last year has only existed in the 6 months of winter. Last year we extended, because of the housing shortage that we have here in town, we extended for 2 extra months. So this will only be our second year really even existing in warmer weather. So it'll be interesting to see how that works. But if last year was at all an indication, I'm not expecting numbers to plummet. I think many people will choose, if they can, to be inside rather than be camping outside. So I'm anticipating that our numbers won't drop a whole lot at the shelter itself. One Roof meal times probably won't change. But the times in between, people love being outside. So when it's nice, so I'm guessing we will have less people in the space between meals. And then our housing program, people need housing year round, so that won't change. But it'll be interesting to see the shelter in particular and how that changes. Though I'm not anticipating, other than it might not be as hard for people to go out in the morning. Going out into the cold. Is not a pleasant experience. But beyond that, I think that our numbers will probably stay pretty consistent.
I'm very curious, what are the needs for the Warming Room as a shelter in terms of supplies in the wintertime versus what you need during the warmer months of the year? So how is it different for you guys in what you need, what you're able to do, and how you deliver your services?
Yeah. So most people, obviously, in the wintertime are looking for, things to keep them warm. So good gloves, good toques, and then thicker socks. Socks are still something that are needed in year round, but we're not needing. We won't go through the same amount of socks because people aren't. You're not getting soakers on a regular basis, and those sorts of things. So I would say that would be one difference. The other is just, for our own cleaning, we don't have to, summer's a little bit less dirty, just in people tracking in mud and all those sorts of things. So our own cleaning supplies. The staples, we always need coffee. So we are always asking for people to donate coffee. We're always asking for people to donate things like Lysol wipes. Those are like gold. Things, gloves are pieces that we use currently. Underwear is something that we always need, both men's and women's. And so those pieces are things that we need year-round. Sugar, milk, but other things like, obviously, winter coats we're not looking for, but those are important in the wintertime.
So that people drop them off at the Broad Street entrance of the church?
Yeah, so if they could bring it to the One Roof entrance, which is kind of on Brock Street. There's a lower entrance there. Or they can drop it off at our offices, which are at the old Pearson Daycare Center, which is 551. It's the only building on Water Street that has a playground in the front yard.
True.
So if you're at the police station, it's the one that's across the street with a playground.
Yeah, so it's just a couple blocks.
Yeah, exactly. So you can drop it off there.
Yeah, and I previously talked to you a little while ago about the cleaning challenges for shelters in Peterborough. Well, it's not just in Peterborough, but it's a provincial, national probably international problem that, you have these places that are kind of worked to the bone in terms of, got people coming in and out constantly. So cleaning is always a challenge.
Yeah. Well, just standards in general are so important and yet so hard to implement. I mean, if you think of any of us, I mean, I'll speak from Warming Room in particular, but we exist in the basement of a church, right? That's what we are as a shelter. We would never advertise that we're more than cots in the basement of a church. We would love to be more than that, but it's not a landlord. Landlords aren't like, we really want to have a shelter in our space. You know what I mean? Like, so finding locations is quite difficult. So when we find something, Murray Street has been very generous to be our partner for the last many years, right? So, but that being said, it is the basement of a church, right? We don't have showers. We don't meet standards that we would like to meet. People should be able to live in better conditions than that. But at this point, that is what we're able to provide. Hopefully in the future that could change. But, and I know my staff, right now, our numbers are just so high. They're just making sure everyone's okay, make sure everyone's fed. I mean, they are cleaning. Let me say, we have janitorial staff that do that and all those sorts of things. So it's not a pigsty. It's none of those things, right? But you can imagine that a space gets hit hard regularly that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we've been covering the housing issues here in Peterborough and the lack thereof, social housing. Last week or the week before, we talked with a family that was living in a parking lot on Brock Street who they didn't have anywhere else to go, and I think they ended up saying that they were going to go to the warming room. So, I mean, you guys are kind of, for those people, the housing issue kind of hits you first.
Yeah, and I think this is the reality, is we have to look at, so often we've told the story of homelessness as if it's individuals making bad choices that results in homelessness, right? But the reality is that we've created as a system the conditions that allow for homelessness to exist. So that being planning in such a way that we don't have enough housing for the amount of people that live here, that need rental housing, right? Like that's an issue, and that causes homelessness. Or changes that were done to social assistance programs in the 90s in the province have had massive impacts on homelessness, right? Like, if you talk to people who have been in it for longer than I have, I was a high school student in the 90s, so I was more thinking about the teacher stuff that was happening, right? And the big strike that happened. Yeah, it was, but now I realize how much those decisions were made have transformed what homelessness looks like. So we have created the conditions that allow homelessness to exist, and yet we tell the story as if it's individuals making choices that lead them there. And that's where, and I think we tell that story because it's more comfortable for us. It makes more sense for us.
There's a sense of blame.
Exactly. We can blame someone, and it allows me to say, I have things are going well for me because I deserve it. But the shadow side of that is if something's going not well for someone, it means they must deserve that too. And so we might not express that, but our policies certainly do so often, right? In the way in which we treat marginalized individuals.
So to explain further, I mean, the welfare, if there's a single man living on welfare, they might have enough money for a room, but not enough for food, toiletries, socks.
Exactly.
For the rest of the month. There's just not enough money, and if they're not working, it's really difficult to put yourself together to get a job, because everyone's answer is, well, just get a job without a stable address, without clean socks. Those kinds of things undermine your ability to get a job or to put yourself up. And some people have health issues that it's going to take a lot more than
exactly.
And there are ways of mitigating that to an extent. I mean, you have rent-geared to income housing where
there's hardly any of that.
That's the issue with that, and there's also rent supplements in which there's hardly any of that either, and the wait list for rent supplements it's long.
It's 1,400 people plus.
Yeah.
And rent subs are a great thing, and I think they're really positive. What scares me about them is that, and it's the same with anything, is that it's an easy signing of a document by a change in government that all of a sudden a ton of people go to being at risk of homelessness, right? Because
they make it sound simple, but there's dollars attached to those supplements.
There's a huge amount, right? And so if all of a sudden I lose my rent supplement, I can't afford this apartment anymore, right? And that terrifies me because it's a potential bubble that could pop. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be investing in rent subs or any of those things, but it scares me how easy that can disappear. Or what happens, they often have timelines, right? They're not, and so, a 5-year program, at the end of that 5 years, the likelihood of that individual not needing that rent supplement is they're going to need it still.
And there's a social cost of having that person on the street.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of healthcare and social services, usually outweighs the cost of that rent supplement, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, and that's where I think things like we need to be looking at things like basic income guarantee and those sorts of pieces, because then we're looking at people can actually afford to live, right? We need to be creating housing where people can we need to be raising income so people can actually afford to live, right? Like right now, that's not the case. And the inequality is just getting worse, right? And I worry. I was just speaking to a group just earlier, and we were discussing how things, unless we start addressing pieces like this, things like even the 407 coming or the GO, if those things happen, those are positive things, but those often have negative impacts on our most marginalized populations because that brings rent prices up and leaves others behind. All those sorts of things, right?
Because incomes are not changing.
No, exactly.
And I know there's a lot of housing developments that are happening right now in Peterborough, and mixed-use housing is going to be a part of that. But at the same time, there's still not going to be that needed supply of housing for the people who need it most, which is people who are on a fixed income.
Yeah, and I think that's where we need, as a community, I mean, the reality is that, in my experience, is that what becomes political issues or hot-button issues are what the community cares about, right? And so often we might blame politicians for not caring. But the reality is they will do what the people care about, right? Yeah. And if we as a community make housing an issue that affects us all, then that's going to become one of the major issues. But if it's one where we think housing is a good idea, but what I really care about is this or this or
my
this.
taxes stay low.
Exactly. Then it's easy. If I'm going to always choose lower taxes over someone else's housing.
But a lot of people want their taxes lower because they're seniors who are.
Yeah.
If my taxes go up, can I stay in my house?
Mm-hmm.
It's a really delicate cycle.
Yeah, and so how can we be thinking? How can we approach politics from a common good standpoint as opposed to so that we all have what we need instead of just I'm making sure I have what I need. It doesn't. We're so competitive. Or sometimes we can see things as competition.
Yeah. Interesting that you bring politics into this because we have a provincial election coming up. So for people who care about this issue, what is your advice to them going into the election? To what issues should they focus on, or on each party's platform when it comes to homelessness, social housing, rent geared income, basic income pilots, shelters, shelter funding? Yeah,
I think asking when people come to the door, being prepared with questions. I think if it's the incumbent, if it's, I guess if it's in ours, if it's Jeff Leal coming to your door, you're asking not just, do you support housing? Everyone supports housing. No one's going to say, no, I'm against housing. But asking, when did you last speak to housing in the House of Commons? What did you, or in Queen's Park, what did you say, right? Like asking specific questions of, what do you think is the way forward on this? Asking what action has been taken. I think that's really important. I think if people representing the other parties is saying, what will you do? What will you do to work towards changing our housing policies? To bringing, the provincial government has downloaded so much onto the municipal, and I don't want to take responsibility away from the municipal government, but so much has been downloaded onto them without the proper funding to do so. Will you support taking some of that back to the provincial level? Will the province take more responsibility for the housing of its people? I think those kind of questions are really important. And if they keep hearing it going door to door and at the all candidates meetings, then all of a sudden it can change at least the conversation in the election. But then after the election, you keep on engaging, right? And this is the thing, is that really the powerful time, they'll promise you anything at this moment, right? But But afterwards, it's the continual push that really needs to happen.
Do you get government funding for your operations?
So we are funded partially by the municipality. So in all our programs have a partial funding, and then we fundraise the rest. So different grants, and a lot of personal donations. But we receive some municipal funding and some provincial through the municipal government for our home program.
Just to bring it back down to a local level before we cap it off, last spring we dealt with a very big housing crunch. It led to cost of housing increasing, and the housing supply it's still very low. It's at around 1%.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think we're going to be seeing this spring in terms of the housing supply, and how is that going to affect you and the people who use the warming room?
I worry that we are going to continue with with all the shelters being close or at capacity on a regular basis, because it is incredibly difficult to move people into housing. And I'm anticipating this spring with the numbers. Our numbers are higher this year at warming room than they were last year at this time. So I'm not anticipating that this will be a better spring than last spring.
Same faces or different faces?
Different. Yeah, I mean, some similar faces, but a lot of different faces. So.
All right. Yeah. Christian, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thanks so much.
I appreciate you coming out here and sharing your perspective.
Well, thank you, and thanks for Peterborough This Week for being such an awesome paper. So.
Thank you. All right, and we will see you next week.